The millionaire boss's twins were deaf. That single fact hung like a shadow over his empire. A truth money could never erase. It was a Thursday afternoon on the 40th floor of the Manning Corporation, where the air itself carried the weight of power. Floor-2 ceiling windows framed the city skyline, a kingdom of steel and light that belonged to one man, Richard Manning, a billionaire, a strategist, a name whispered in boardrooms with both respect and envy. But that afternoon, the silence inside his executive office was heavier than the hum of traffic below. It was the kind of silence that presses on the chest, the kind that refuses to be ignored. Patricia Williams, the new cleaning lady, pushed her cart through the polished glass doors with practiced steps. She was not the kind of woman who drew attention. Middle-aged, shoulders squared from years of hard work, her dark skin glowing faintly under the office lights. She had learned to blend into the background, to move silently where power resided. But what she saw in that corner of the office stopped her in her tracks. Two little girls, identical, 6 years old, curly blonde hair that caught the sunlight in threads of gold. Eyes the color of glassy oceans, unblinking, fragile, otherworldly. They sat cross-legged on the expensive carpet, dolls resting in their small hands, lips moving gently as if whispering secrets that would never reach the ear of another. No sound, no laughter, no cries of joy or anger, just silence. Patricia froze, her cleaning supplies rattling faintly against the cart. She had cleaned banks, hotels, and offices her whole life, but never had silence unsettled her the way it did in that moment. It was a silence too perfect, too absolute, and too sad. Without glancing up from his mountain of documents, Richard Manning broke the stillness with a voice that was cold but calm, like a judge delivering a sentence. "Don't worry about them," he said. "Emma and Sophie have been deaf since birth, completely deaf." Patricia's heart clenched. She looked again at the girls, noticing the way their eyes flicked to each other with uncanny precision, the way their tiny fingers moved in fragments of signs, piecing together a language no one else in that room could fully understand. Richard Manning, billionaire CEO, sat in a leather chair worth more than Patricia's yearly salary. His pen scratched across paper, his suit perfect, his cufflinks gleaming. Power radiated from him. And yet, behind him, sat the most fragile proof that wealth cannot purchase everything. For all his cars, mansions, and titles, Richard Manning had never heard the voices of his own children. The world envied him. The magazines celebrated him. But here, inside this glass tower, his empire of noise and ambition was built on a foundation of silence. Patricia couldn't tear her eyes away. She thought of her own struggles, of the nights she worked 2 jobs, of the moments she had to choose between rent and food, of the prayers she whispered in the dark for strength. She knew pain, she knew sacrifice. But this kind of silence was something else, something cruel. She bent down to pick up a rag, pretending to busy herself, but inside, her heart was racing. The girls watched her now, their crystal blue eyes curious, almost searching. One of them tilted her head, a doll slipping from her hand, and for the briefest second, Patricia felt a connection, a thread of understanding that bypassed sound itself. She looked back at Richard Manning. His face was hard, unreadable. He had mastered the art of control, but in his eyes, she caught a flicker of something he would never admit: guilt. A father who could buy the world, but not the one thing that mattered. And Patricia knew in that moment that this was not just another cleaning job. Fate had placed her in this office, in this silence, for a reason, because what she was about to do in the coming weeks, what no one expected of her, would not only change the life of these twins, but also shatter the walls Richard Manning had built around himself. For now, she picked up her bucket, wiped down the spotless glass desk, and pretended to be invisible. But inside, she carried a storm. The silence of the 40th floor would not last forever. The 40th floor was not designed for children. It was a place of steel, glass, and polished marble, a shrine to corporate ambition. Yet every Thursday afternoon, Emma and Sophie occupied that corner of their father's kingdom, their small bodies framed against a backdrop of wealth they couldn't hear and didn't care to understand. Patricia returned the following week, her cart rattling over the immaculate floor. She tried to keep her gaze down, but she couldn't help noticing the twins again. The same perfect curls, the same crystal eyes, the same silence pressing down like a heavy curtain. She thought it strange. Children were never still. Children were noisy storms of questions, laughter, and chaos. But these girls were different. Their world was stillness, their joy contained, their voices locked inside. Yet as Patricia dusted the endless rows of bookshelves, something happened. Emma, the one with the doll in a blue dress, tilted her head and watched Patricia with quiet intensity. Sophie followed, her lips moving, shaping words that would never reach the air. Patricia felt their gaze like a weight. She froze, a rag in her hand, her heart thudding. And then, instinctively, she did something she hadn't planned. She lifted her hand, slowly, carefully. She curled her fingers into a shape she hadn't used in years, a memory from her younger days when her cousin, born deaf, taught her fragments of sign language. Hello. Just one word, silent and simple. But the twins' reaction was immediate. Their eyes widened, like someone had suddenly opened a door in a locked house. Emma gasped, though no sound followed. Sophie dropped her doll, scrambling to mimic the shape Patricia had made. For the first time in that office, Patricia saw something break through the silence. Recognition. Connection. Her throat tightened. She quickly turned back to her cart, afraid Richard Manning might notice. But he was too absorbed in his empire, his pen scratching across yet another contract that would earn him more millions. To him, the twins were simply present bodies in the room, not voices in his world. The girls, however, were not finished. They inched closer, small hands fumbling, their fingers repeating Patricia's silent gesture. Hello, and without meaning to, Patricia answered again. This time, she shaped another word. Friend. Their faces lit up. It was a light money couldn't buy, a spark pure and fragile. Patricia's heart ached. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't planned to speak their language. But something inside her, a force deeper than duty, had answered their silent call. From that day forward, the routine shifted. She still polished the glass, still scrubbed the marble, still made herself invisible. But whenever Richard looked away, Patricia's hands moved. Slowly at first, then more confidently. She taught them little things. Happy, play, thank you. The twins soaked up every sign with hungry eyes, as if someone had finally given them permission to exist. By the third week, Emma tugged at Patricia's sleeve and signed something clumsy but powerful. You, friend, but Patricia nearly cried. For years, she had been just a cleaner, a shadow in other people's kingdoms. But here, in the empire of silence, she had found her purpose. Not in money, not in recognition, but in reaching into a world no one else bothered to enter. The twins began waiting for her. Each Thursday, their dolls forgotten, their eyes scanning the door until she appeared. Their excitement was not loud, it never could be, but it was fierce. They signed eagerly, their tiny fingers stumbling, their faces glowing. Richard, however, remained blind to it. To him, Patricia was background noise, a necessary presence to keep his kingdom shining. He didn't notice how his daughters leaned closer to her. He didn't see their silent smiles. His empire was built on contracts, not on moments like these, but Patricia noticed everything. She saw the loneliness in their eyes when he brushed past them without a glance. She saw how their small hands reached for each other, finding comfort in their mirrored silence, and she made herself a promise. If fate had placed her in their lives, she would not let them remain unseen. She would not allow the silence to swallow their voices forever. That night, as she walked home through the noisy streets, Patricia thought of her cousin, the boy who taught her sign language when she was a teenager. She remembered his laugh, his stubborn resilience, his way of carving joy out of silence. He had passed away years ago, but his lessons lived inside her hands. Now perhaps, those lessons had found their purpose because Emma and Sophie were more than deaf. Twins in a billionaire's shadow. They were children with a voice waiting to be heard, and Patricia, a simple cleaning lady with nothing but her hands and her heart, was about to change everything. The silent bond had been forged, but soon, it would demand a choice that would test Patricia's courage, Richard's pride, and the very walls of the Manning Empire. The silence of the 40th floor was cracking. The silence of the 40th floor had changed. It was no longer just the sterile hush of polished offices and closed boardrooms. It now carried whispers, silent gestures, secret smiles, small hands moving in a hidden language that Richard Manning never saw. For weeks, Patricia nurtured that fragile connection. Each Thursday she became less of a cleaner and more of a teacher, more of a companion. The girls absorbed everything she showed them, their fingers clumsy but eager, their faces lighting up with each new sign. Patricia's rag polished glass, but her hands polished something far more precious. Hope. But hope has a way of disturbing the walls people build around themselves. And Richard Manning had built walls higher than his skyscraper. It began on a Thursday afternoon like any other. Patricia wheeled her cart into the office, nodding politely as always. Richard hardly glanced at her, lost in the endless scroll of figures and contracts. But Emma and Sophie, they were waiting. The moment she stepped inside, they scrambled forward, their dolls forgotten, their hands lifted eagerly, shaping the word she had taught them the week before. Happy. Patricia smiled, her chest aching at their effort. She signed back, yes, happy. They giggled silently, their shoulders shaking with delight. But Richard's voice cut through the room, sharp and impatient. What's going on? Patricia froze. Her hands dropped instantly, the rag clutched tightly. The girls stiffened, their small bodies retreating. Richard's eyes narrowed, scanning the scene. Why are they flapping their hands like that? His tone was dismissive, almost irritated. Is this some kind of game you're playing with them? Patricia's mouth went dry. She wanted to explain, to tell him this wasn't a game at all. It was the first bridge his daughters had ever built to the world. But the weight of her position crushed her words. She was just a cleaner. He was a billionaire CEO. Sir, she stammered. But before she could finish, Emma tugged at her father's sleeve. Her small fingers moved again. awkward but clear. Friend. Richard frowned, not recognizing the language. What is she doing? He demanded. Patricia swallowed hard. She's trying to tell you something. Tell me. His laugh was cold, short. They can't talk. They never will. Doctors told me years ago. I've accepted it. You should, too. The girls shrank back, their silent joy crumbling into fear. Patricia's heart burned. She wanted to scream at him, shake him, force him to see what was right in front of him, but she stayed still, her hands trembling around the rag. Richard's eyes lingered on her for a moment, suspicion flickering. Then, with a dismissive wave, he returned to his paperwork. Clean. That's what you're here for. And just like that, the glass tower reasserted itself. His empire, his rules, his blindness. But Patricia knew something Richard didn't. The cracks were already spreading. That night, Patricia couldn't sleep. She replayed the moment over and over, the twins' brave little hands, signing friend, to a father who didn't even recognize the word. She thought of their faces, the way their eyes dimmed under his dismissal. Was it her place to interfere? Was it her right to challenge a billionaire in his own office? But then she remembered their smiles, their laughter without sound, their eyes sparkling with the first taste of belonging, and she made a decision. If Richard Manning refused to open the door, she would keep teaching the girls how to build their own. The following Thursday, Patricia returned. As always, she moved carefully, mindful of Richard's presence. But when his attention shifted, her hands moved to learn, strong, dream, words, beyond cleaning, words that gave power. The girls responded with hunger, their fingers stumbling but determined. They practiced with each other, correcting, encouraging, glowing. Patricia saw it, the seeds of something greater, a silent language becoming a bridge. Yet every week, she also saw Richard still blind, still unreachable. His empire gleamed, but his daughters lived in shadows he never acknowledged. Until one afternoon, fate forced him to notice. A meeting had run late. Executives filled the office, their voices bouncing against the walls, the air thick with tension. Richard commanded the room, his words sharp, his tone absolute. And in the corner, the twins sat silently, as always, forgotten, invisible. But then Sophie dropped her doll. It rolled across the polished floor, landing near one of the executives' chairs. She crawled after it and, in doing so, accidentally brushed against Patricia's cleaning cart. A bucket tipped, water spilled, spreading across the floor. The executives gasped, papers lifting, voices sharp with annoyance. Richard's face darkened. He spun toward Patricia, his anger ready to strike. But before he could, Emma's small hands shot up. Desperate, trembling, but clear. She signed. Not her fault. The room froze. Patricia froze. And for the first time, Richard Manning saw it. His daughter, signing, protecting someone else with a language he didn't understand. His anger faltered. His voice caught what? What was that? Emma repeated it, slower this time, her blue eyes fierce. Not her fault. The executives exchanged glances. Richard's empire of certainty wavered. His daughters weren't silent dolls. They were speaking. Just not in the way he had ever cared to see. Patricia's heart pounded. The cracks were widening. The glass tower was beginning to shatter. Richard Manning was a man who built empires by refusing to be wrong. In boardrooms, in courtrooms, in markets, his certainty was unshakable. It was the foundation of his wealth, his reputation, his towering glass fortress. But now, for the first time in years, he wasn't certain. That night, long after the executives had left and the city's skyline glowed below, Richard sat in his leather chair replaying the moment over and over. His daughter's hands, small, determined, shaping words he had never been willing to learn. Not her fault. He tried to dismiss it. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps Patricia had taught them tricks, gestures with no real meaning. Perhaps he was simply imagining it. But the memory of Emma's fierce eyes lingered. They weren't the eyes of a child mimicking shapes. They were the eyes of a child speaking. And suddenly, Richard realized something unsettling. His empire had never prepared him for this kind of truth. The next Thursday came, and Patricia felt the weight in the air the moment she entered. Richard wasn't buried in papers this time. He was watching. The girls hurried forward as always, eager to greet her, their hands lifted, instinctively. Happy. Patricia hesitated. For weeks, she had taught in the shadows, hidden from Richard's gaze. But now his eyes followed her every move, cold and calculating. She signed back, gentle and cautious. Yes, happy. The twins giggled silently, but Richard's voice broke the fragile joy. What does that mean? His tone was flat, but his eyes demanded answers. Patricia swallowed. Her fingers trembled on the rag. It means, happy, sir. His brow furrowed. You've been teaching them. What is it, sign language? Yes, her voice was soft, but steady. They're learning fast. They're brilliant. His jaw tightened. He looked at his daughters, laughing without sound, their hands alive with newfound expression, and then back at Patricia. Doctors told me they'd never communicate. They said therapy was pointless. Patricia's heart ached. Doctors don't always see what love and patience can do. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard's face hardened. "You're a cleaner, not a teacher, not a doctor. Remember that." The twins shrank back at the sharpness in his voice. Patricia lowered her gaze, shame burning in her chest. But inside, anger flickered too. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at the cracks in the walls he had built. Days passed. Richard threw himself into his empire with renewed fury. Meetings doubled. Deals piled higher. His schedule suffocated him. But no matter how much he buried himself in contracts and numbers, the image of Emma's small hands signing haunted him. One night he found himself alone in his penthouse, staring at his reflection in the glass windows. The city stretched out beneath him, pulsing with life. And in that reflection, he saw a man who could build skyscrapers but couldn't speak to his own children. A thought whispered through him, sharp as glass. What if I failed them? He hated the thought, fought it, but it stayed. The following Thursday, Patricia returned, as always. She braced herself for dismissal, for coldness, for the end of what she had built with the girls. Instead, she found Richard standing near the window, silent. He didn't bark orders. He didn't wave her away. He just watched. Patricia began cleaning, her movements careful. The girls tugged at her sleeve, eager. She hesitated, then raised her hands. Learn. The girls mirrored her, their fingers stumbling, but bright. They giggled at each other's mistakes, correcting gently. Patricia smiled, and then she noticed something: Richard's reflection in the glass. His eyes weren't cold this time. They were searching, following. Almost learning. Later that evening, Patricia wheeled her cart into the hallway. She expected Richard to remain behind, locked in his empire. But his voice stopped her. "Why? Are you doing this?" She turned, startled. His expression was unreadable. "Why are you teaching them?" "No one asked you to." Patricia hesitated. Then she spoke the truth. "Because they deserve a voice. And because no child should grow up thinking silence means nothingness." His jaw clenched. He looked away, out at the skyline, as though the city might offer him answers. "You think you know better than me." His voice was low, dangerous. Patricia shook her head gently. "No, sir, I just see them." The words cut deeper than she intended. Richard didn't reply. But something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of pain, quickly buried. That night, Richard opened his laptop, but instead of contracts and mergers, he typed something he hadn't searched in years. ASL Basics for Beginners. Videos loaded. Hands moved across screens. Shapes, words, meanings. He watched in silence. His empire had always been built on power and dominance. But here, in the quiet glow of his laptop, he was a beginner again. Clumsy, unsure, vulnerable. For the first time in decades, Richard Manning didn't feel like a titan. He felt like a father who had been absent too long. But empires don't crumble overnight. Denial doesn't vanish in a single lesson. Richard's walls were cracked, but they were not yet broken. The twins continued to bloom with Patricia, their hands alive, their eyes glowing brighter each week. And Richard continued to hover on the edge, watching, resisting, questioning, until one Thursday, fate demanded he choose. Rain hammered against the glass walls of the tower, streaking the skyline with silver veins. The city was restless that night, as though the storm carried secrets too heavy for the air to contain. Inside, Richard Manning sat at the head of a polished oak table, his empire spread out before him in charts and numbers. Executives droned, deals unfolded, but his mind wasn't in the room. It was back in the penthouse, where two little girls waited, hands restless, voices locked away behind silence. For weeks now, he had been watching, resisting, hiding behind denial. But every night, when the city quieted, he found himself replaying Patricia's words. No child should grow up thinking silence means nothingness. The storm outside felt like a mirror. His walls were breaking. That Thursday began like any other. Patricia entered with her cart, the girls rushing to greet her. But this time, Richard didn't retreat behind his desk. He lingered, watching, listening to the silence that wasn't silence anymore. Emma signed eagerly. "Play, learn." Patricia smiled, responding in kind. The girls' laughter, silent but radiant, filled the space with warmth. And then it happened. Emma turned to Richard, not to Patricia, not to her sister, to him. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately. "Love you." The world stopped. Richard's breath caught. His empire, his wealth, his towers, none of it had prepared him for this. His daughter, whom doctors had written off, whom he had quietly pitied as broken, was speaking to him, telling him something he had never dared to believe. She could love you. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Sophia clapped silently, as though cheering her sister on. The room held its breath, waiting. But Richard froze. His hands twitched uselessly at his sides. He wanted to respond, but he didn't know how. The shame was crushing. His empire had given him everything except the ability to answer his own child. Emma's hopeful eyes dimmed. She lowered her hands, her shoulders shrinking. And in that instant, Richard felt the full weight of his denial. He hadn't been protecting himself from false hope. He had been protecting himself from the truth, that he had been absent. that he had failed them. The storm outside raged harder. Lightning cracked across the sky, a jagged reminder that walls of glass can shatter in an instant. Patricia began to comfort Emma, but Richard's voice broke through, unsteady, raw. No, the words startled them. He rose from his chair, his towering frame trembling with a vulnerability he hadn't shown in years. Don't stop, his voice cracked. He turned to Patricia. What did she just say? Patricia wiped at her tears. She said she loves you, Mr. Manning. The words gutted him. For all his wealth, he had never felt poorer. For all his power, he had never felt weaker. His knees almost buckled, but he steadied himself. Slowly, awkwardly, he raised his hands, imitating what he had seen on his laptop late at night. Love you. It wasn't perfect. His fingers stumbled, his form clumsy. But the meaning was there. Emma's eyes lit up like the skyline after a blackout. Sophia clapped again, this time harder, her silent joy filling the room. Patricia covered her mouth, stifling a sob, and Richard Manning, the man who built glass towers, felt his walls collapse for good. That moment became the breaking point. The weeks that followed were no longer filled with cold meetings and sterile silence. They were filled with lessons, stumbles, laughter without sound, and words without voices. Richard became a student in his own home. Patricia taught patiently, the twins correcting his clumsy hands with gentle giggles. His empire still demanded him, but something inside had shifted. Deals could wait. Towers could stand without him for a night, but childhood would not wait. He began leaving meetings earlier. He began watching less of the skyline and more of his daughters. And slowly, the three of them built a language no empire could buy. Months later, on a quiet evening, Richard stood with Emma and Sophia at the glass walls of the penthouse. The city glowed beneath them, endless and alive. Emma tapped his arm, drawing his gaze. Her hands shaped words smoothly now, confident. Proud of you. Richard swallowed hard. He had spent a lifetime chasing that phrase from investors, from competitors, from the faceless world outside. But hearing it here, from his daughter, in the silence of their shared language, it meant everything. He signed back, steady this time. Proud of you too. Sophia squeezed his hand. Emma leaned against him. Patricia watched quietly from the doorway, unseen tears glistening. For the first time in decades, Richard Manning didn't feel like a titan trapped in glass. He felt like a father. The storm had passed. The skyline stretched endless, and in the silence that was no longer empty, Richard had found the one empire worth keeping.